Now let's turn to the scandal engulfing Britain's taxpayer-funded broadcaster, the BBC, and how the ABC should be under similar pressure. The Green Left values and ideology of the BBC are mirrored by the ABC here in Australia. They claim to be trusted, objective and unbiased. But the ABC, like the BBC, is nothing of the sort. It patronisingly espouses far-left ideologies, frequently mocking Liberal politicians and taking a light approach to Labor and the Greens. The bias of the BBC has been obvious to us all. But now a global scandal has erupted after a leaked dossier revealed that the BBC doctored footage of Donald Trump and also spread Hamas propaganda globally. The dossier was compiled by a member of the BBC's Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. The journalist Gordon Rayner, who broke these stories, who got the leaked dossier, he's on my show tonight. He discovered that the BBC had edited clips of Trump speaking to make it appear that he had encouraged the Capitol Hill riot when he was actually urging them to peacefully make their voices heard. Have a look.
BBC Panorama released a documentary called Trump, A Second Chance, and in it they played the following clip.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell.
Between Capitol and that's a cut. Here's what Trump actually said.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Just appalling. It also emerged in this dossier that BBC Arabic had minimised Israeli suffering in the Gaza war in order to promote Israel as the aggressor. The internal report also found that the BBC raced to air allegations against Israel before fact-checking and also promoted Hamas propaganda, including its made-up casualty figures.
In April and June 2024, the BBC published 2 stories about the discovery of mass graves at Al-Nasser and Al-Shifa hospitals in Gaza. According to the internal BBC dossier, the articles strongly implied that Israeli forces had buried bodies at both sites prior to withdrawing from the area. But the BBC's own Editorial Standards Committee was told that this narrative was wrong. The memo says that the most likely explanation is that the mass graves were dug by Palestinians themselves and the people buried there had died or been killed prior to the arrival of the Israeli ground forces.
Now, UK Telegraph columnist Alistair Heath writes that this expose has shown the BBC to be dishonest, prone to cover-ups, and often wrong about important matters. He writes that fuelled by billions of pounds extracted via the licence fee, the BBC has spent 40 years shrinking the Overton window, waging war against centre-right dissidents, bullying politicians into following destructive orthodoxies, and promoting an anti-Western, anti-capitalist, anti-conservative worldview. He said its output, riddled with groupthink, lapped up by our decrepit establishment, reeks of oikophobia, economic illiteracy, soft socialism, suicidal empathy, and luxury beliefs. And while, story by story, the BBC may pass the official lens of objectivity, much like the ABC, Alistair Heath writes that its prejudices come through in story selection, the questions it asks, its interview picks, and the slant of reporters, editors, and interviewers. Well, virtually the same could be said about the ABC. Like the ABC here has fuelled the rise in anti-Semitism by giving near constant critical and one-sided coverage of Israel over the past 2 years. And like the BBC, the ABC's coverage often amplifies anti-Israel perspective and allows pro-Hamas talking points to go untested. It's been so hostile to Israel and has disregarded the anti-Semitism crisis that it's no wonder Jewish journalists like Ilan Zetlin have had to leave the ABC. The ABC's lack of critical thinking on energy policy is also obvious. And meanwhile, its investigative programs like Four Corners have spent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars investigating Liberal politicians over the years, including, as you'll recall, pursuing decades-old complaints about Christian Porter that forced a bright politician out of office. But when was the last time you recall a story exposing a Labor politician? It rarely happens. Likewise, they're happy to pursue Christian institutions and target the likes of George Pell. But there's been little examination of the scourge of radical Islam, despite its obvious problems that ASIO is concerned about. And Mike Burgess spoke about it just this week. Now, I've personally never supported shutting down the ABC or privatising it because I think it is important to have a news service that's unaffected by advertising revenues or declining audiences or the economic conditions of the day. The news matters, and there should be a service that delivers it to all audiences, regardless of commercial considerations. But now I wonder if it's insanity for our taxpayer dollars to promote a narrative that sows social discord, that turns Australians against Jews, that pushes a green view of the world, creating problems in society, and that bullies Conservative politicians out of office for perceived crimes that could never be proven. Why should the taxpayer fund an organisation that is objectively damaging our society? Now, Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull used to throw their support behind a Murdoch Royal Commission. But why hasn't there been discussion of a Royal Commission into the ABC and SBS, given their use of billions of taxpayer dollars, and when their bias is clearly uncontrollable? Or perhaps it's time we start having that debate.